Yes, well, kia ora everyone, and ko Shireen Chua, and I hail from Tamaki, Auckland, but I have strong ties to the Waikato, where I'm also pursuing a PhD in cultural diversity and leadership. I was speaking to a bunch of what I call bananas, no, over the weekend. They were kind of quite like me, where they were Mandarin teachers in our New Zealand high schools. So when I describe myself as a banana, what that explains is that I'm ethnically Chinese, but I am not Chinese in the inside in my culture. I've been here about 34 years. So that's what I was doing over the weekend, was helping them to also, I guess, look at how they can manage their cultural diversity in their classrooms as they seek to teach students Mandarin. And in terms of some of the cohorts and some of the folk where I've been working, local government, Ashburton District Council, shout out to them. I was working with the global ambassadors. There are 6 young people who are movers and shakers wanting to, I guess, work in the space of a leadership in the global world, and as well as that, some work and teaching in Waikato University and in some local government. So this is a fascinating phenomena that's really over the last 10-15 years is even amplifying cultural diversity. So here's my question to you: what do you understand? What is your understanding of cultural diversity, and how diverse are your farms? Big challenge we have is really defining what cultural diversity is, because culture is learned behavior in groups, social groups. So think about all your different social groupings that you are part of, and you can describe cultural diversity. And so what that means is that it's one of the most complex and hardest things to actually handle, and also then navigate, because how do you actually deeply understand each other when there's so much differences? And I just wanted to put a table forward just to show you how diverse we all are, and the clicks may show up as well. Sorry, but these are some of the dimensions of cultural diversity that all of us have, and these are only tertiary dimensions. So there's so much more to each one of us. And I talk about the diversity of the diverse because so often, as Cherie has said, we often are quite superficial in our interactions, and it's often the primary dimensions that we go for. And that's part of my research, is that how do we make it deeper than the superficial parts of engagement? Because the primary dimensions may shape how we see each other, but actually belonging and deep connection and understanding often comes when there is deeper conversations in the secondary and tertiary dimensions. So so often, someone would say to me, "So, where are you from?" And depending on the day I feel, I'll go, "Oh, Palmerston North," and they'll go, "It doesn't compute." You're not meant to be from Palmerston North, but that for me is where my belonging was. If someone asked me where I felt, if I had a hometown to pick in New Zealand, it would either be Palmerston North or Kirikiriroa. So like that doesn't work because we've got assumptions and stereotypes happening. And the other part to it is that this is just a bit more different perspectives, going deeper in an organization. In dairying, you might have a bit more, it might be a bit flatter structure, but the folk in the Waikato will have a different culture than the folk in Southland. I haven't figured it out, but I'd love to know how culturally different you are, and what, your common focus is dairy farming, but there might be some practices or some language or some ways you do things that is shaped by your environment. And so this is just to just show you how diverse human beings are, and increasingly so as globalization brings people to our country And what's happening too is the next generation will look even more different. So when I was just saying with the Ashburton District Council, four of those folk, the young leaders that I was coaching were New Zealand-based Filipinos who were torn between being purely from the Philippines culture, what is expected in their social grouping, but being here and having learned different behaviors and values that now have shaped who they are. And so they were almost becoming like bananas. And so this is just how diverse we all are. And beneath that is all of these different things which so often we don't know. And that's what causes some degree of misunderstanding, fear of engaging what's hidden beneath us. And if I had a workshop with you, we would pick some of these and start to talk about it. And COVID's changing it again because it's starting to shape some of these understandings of how we work, who is a leader, theory of disease. If you're sick, what are the ways that you choose to become well? and so all of these then are shaped by your environment, and then you also then try to practice it. So ultimately, this whole goal of developing intercultural intelligence is no longer focusing on what's different, but starting to draw people to start to be safe and ready to embrace different perspectives well. And so the whole journey of intercultural intelligence, when I often talk about it, is I call it this. It's people from the blue culture. Hang on. Is my slide working? Yep. When they have to work with people from the red culture, need to learn to work in the purple space. So you can't be red or you can't be blue, but you need to learn to work in that purple space. And how important that goal and outcome is how much you flex. So I've put some gradient in the purple. So if this is going to be an absolute, you really need to be able to strengthen this relationship, then you might need to flex more. And for some, they may not flex at all. And so the question is, it's not an equal parts thing, it's a dance. And so when I often define what intercultural intelligence is, I use these terms that it's the ability to create this new cultural space or the purple space by facilitating, win-win solutions. And how you do that is to anticipate and correctly interpret what's before you, and then adjust as best you can to the culturally defined behaviors of others. And I'll just give you some framework to unpack that further. But I guess this is the goal, is that you start to become quite chameleon-like in your behavior. And you will be all doing it naturally, I would say. And so I'm just going to put some theory under it, and then let's have a conversation. First step, we face our biases. All of us have a brain, and if we do, we will be biased. And ultimately, it's training your brain to adapt and to widen its experience. And so that journey starts, and this is not just about people, it's about everything. You start with denial, but if this is about relationships and culture, we're going, there's no difference at all. We're human. And you start to then notice that some of the things that someone does may be pressing your buttons and asking why. But the more you explore that, and again, I think, becoming self-aware, you start to see difference in you are threatened by it. And before long, the more you embrace it, you enjoy and embrace it. So, I mean, the question I often ask to folk is what would be your Friday night takeaway that you would choose? This Friday, what are you going to order if you had to go for takeaways? Let's see if there's any regional differences. You know, think about the first time you were served a curry. How was your response? Were you suspicious? Were you open to oh, let's give it a go? And that's exactly the same thing that happens with engaging with cultural differences in people. Because what happens is your brain's first response is this. It's not loud enough. I can't get this to go loud enough. Fight or flight kicks in. When you start to meet someone, they're like this, you know, they're kind of like really 3D, not even 3D, you know, 1980s Pac-Man. You know, oh, it might be a bit scary. And the goal of intercultural intelligence is really to get to 3D, 4D image. So the goal of that then is to start to train your brain to embrace difference and to go, hey, they're not so scary, you know. And so, yeah, can you give me some ideas or some ways that you might do that? You guys have got cultural diversity in your team, so I'm sure you're already doing this. Food, Kai, always, because it's common. And even, you know, as a team, what you're doing together as a common is what draws folk together. And practically, some other ways that helps to disarm folk, particularly when they're suspicious, when you acknowledge in the positive, it disarms. Because if you were to actually say anything that may cause someone like to perceive it as judgment, the tiger rears up again. And so they're not going to learn anything, they're not going to engage. So a lot of that positive gratitude stuff is actually is shown to be effective. So, you know, we often go, hey, let's just celebrate. That's why Kai and food is so important, because it's positive, it's neutral. And some of the skills that I've been teaching individuals and teams is to be curious. Because as you start to do that, you'll start to then open the world so much more. And that they've shown the conversations that don't tell but invite conversation and participation moves your interaction that is from the base of your brain, which is the tiger, to your prefrontal cortex, which is where trust happens. So what they show is the more you do that, those neural pathways become highways. So you then become natural to go, hey, I noticed this, you know. So that's why they say that this is a journey that you can develop and grow. So developing our cultural intelligence starts with knowing ourselves. And this is just a summary of the red, blue, and the purple. And I talk about developing detective skills to recognize behaviors on farms and the people you interact with. So behaviors are what's visible amongst the conversations and the interactions you have, because what's hidden you can't tell. You know, you won't know until you see behaviors show up. So I often use the cultural iceberg to say what's observable is often the behaviors that show up in your conversations and your teams, and the languages that you've just used are indicative of some of the values that you hold and ultimately some of the beliefs that you have. Now, the aha moment here for you is that all of you are cultural beings. You are unique. So rather than stereotype people into groups, you know, yep, you are all probably in the dairying sector. So you'll have that part of you, but even within that, you'll have different experiences that have shaped you. And so what I wanted to just highlight is that instead of stereotyping into groups of ethnicity or gender or generations, we have to start to see people as individuals. And that's the core goal. And the behaviors that show up will be about 80% of the behaviors are cultural and personality based. So you'll have some folk that are more task oriented, others that are more social. So that's what I mean by being a detective, you know. Start to see what shows up in your conversations and how you also model it. And I guess the key part I wanted to share with you, I guess, was this whole area of our worldviews and our values. And this is profound in the sense that we have a worldview. So we are the sixes or the nines, and we will always be sixes until we learn to see the nines. And what is a worldview? Well, the way I would describe a worldview is how you see the world, how you make sense of what's before you. I said to someone, if you hold on to a phone and you call it a computer long enough in your group, it becomes a computer because your sense making kicks in. And so you can see that over time, things are changing as well. When we talk about worldview, one of the tools that I wanted to introduce to you that I've seen this in everything else that I've looked and researched has been very academic, whereas this one seems very human, and it resonates with Māori, with the youth as well. So it seems to resonate across all the different cultural groups, and it's these three colors of a worldview. And so every one of us will have these three lenses within us. The lens of innocence and guilt, the lens of honor and shame, and the lens of power and fear. Now notice the polarities. One's positive and one's negative. And so there's that polarities there. Now distinct groups may have distinct worldviews. And it doesn't mean that you're competent in adapting. It's just how you see the world and therefore how you behave. And it's shaped by your environment, the social groups that have taught you how to respond in this way. And so this is just a summary. I often do a bit more. I think we did touch a bit on this in the People Expo, and there's a tool that we're using with some of our farms on this. And it's that your innocence and guilt is really about all that's right and wrong. Policy depends on standards. Honor and shame is the respect part, and learning to it's about the relationship and who's who, and so there is sort of, you've got the honor, and I use that respect, and then there's a shame part. And when you shame, there are guidelines what happens internally or externally in groups, and so performance is often linked to the relationship. And power and fear is about hierarchy or status. And often we, in New Zealand anyway, when I've been talking about this, we all react to power going, oh, it's bad. Power is what makes things work, because it's about influence. And so here, I often talk about it being mana enhancing or life-giving. What is it that allows you to then affect the change? And any leader that doesn't want to have any power is going to fail to actually be able to navigate your team. And so these are three worldviews that all of us have. Different ones will have a dominance in the other. So the summary, this is a really quick summary, and this is like taking you through really quickly, but it's personal. So you all have a unique cultural wiring, and you will have one or two primary drivers. For myself, that's why I've got this third culture thing going, is that I was raised in an honor and shame culture till I was 12. I came here and I was educated. So your critical thought and thinking then made me also have a strong innocence and guilt worldview. So those two shape some of my behaviors. And so what then I say is that how then do we go ahead and manage cultural diversity? Well, it's no longer a singular lens. We need to hold all three in tandem. That's the hard bit. So that means that we have to start to think, and so what do I do that is right? Or the decision, is it right? Is it honoring? And is it life-giving? Or sometimes I use the term mana enhancing. So when we place that check into the decisions, or the relationship and how we work, those lenses then start to, I guess, get hold in equal tension. And so there are many case studies which we can do to start to unpack and look at this. So that's the deepest part of our lenses that that shapes behavior. And so the way to then manage cultural diversity is to create a common purpose, a common way of working together. And so holding these three has helped everyone feel valued, respect. And so yeah, that's kind of the new part that I wanted to show you. There are the other part of it is that that's only one part of your behaviors, it's your worldview. The second part is that you all have cultural values. And to just highlight a few, these are just, we've used different language from what has been in the past, because globally and in different cultural contexts, some of those language felt quite academic or Western, so they've used this. So if you are familiar with Hofstede or all of those cultural dimensions, these are some of them, and they range between the 12 that I use to 32 to 42. So what that shows you is that each one of you will have these values. Do you value people, or do you value, well, not things, but materials? So that will determine your behaviors. As you see innovation, do you start from here now, or do you look from the past? So those are things that you start to see, that your values shape some of your behaviors. So those are two tools that help you to see different contexts and relationships. Shireen, I heard you say along the conversations, the trust and respect and honor. And that's what I've found when I've used this tool in local government. The Māori just sit up and go, it gets us. Whereas in the past, when I've used some of the other tools, it was very academic and generally quite Western, whereas you can see these worldviews possibly colliding, but also integrating. And so then we do the 6 and 9 exercise. Okay, what does trust look like for you? How does respect feel? And then secondly, what do we do that needs to be right about this, so that we can both come to that purple space together? So intercultural intelligence is just knowing a bit of this, and then the challenge now is for you to go and test it out. And there's no one size fits all. There is no textbook. It's with relationship, you've got to practice and feel it, and be listening and hearing the words and go, So in terms of some of those worldviews, I just wanted to point out that the power and fear one is an interesting one in New Zealand, because we have reacted to it. And I was just going to point out, poster boy for the power and fear worldview that's dominant is actually the current president of the United States. So he's functioning in the negative part of it, and you'll see that when his hierarchy or his influence wanes, what does he do? He then behaves very differently. He shames, or he calls people out. And so that's his worldview. So when everyone says, oh, it's terrible, that's because our lenses are seeing it from our worldview. And so our worldview is what's right. And he's not doing that, but he's certainly functioning in his worldview. So what then are you going to do about this? And I'm just going to leave you with a tool, and then we will have a discussion. Here's a question. What do you see in this picture? Good observation skills. And that's really helpful in terms of what you see. And the tool that is the most helpful is to describe what's there. The last time we did this with another cohort in dairy farm, they go, terrible farmer that's driving. And what that's done is you've interpreted the situation. And so the tool that I wanted to leave you with is this. Always describe before you interpret. So that description is to start to look at those behaviors and then interpret them in light of your lens and broader before you respond. Because the more you can describe, the safer chance you have of actually creating that purple space. That you're starting to look at the 9s instead of the 6s. And so, make sure you 100% can, stick to the facts when you describe. The water looks pretty bad. So was it unclean, or was it just a muddy day? So start to describe and make sure that that's definitely the feeling. And as you interpret, not just from your lens, but the whole context, and before you respond. So that's kind of the tools I wanted to leave you with. This is just the most profound picture. And as you start to develop high-performing intercultural teams, that the whole notion is then it's a journey. You can't do it overnight. Murray, you were talking about how that looks, in transition, and then rebuilding that. That's constantly something that you do. And some of the foundations of that, Patrick Lencioni talks about those foundations with the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And so when you put cultural diversity into it, let me show you the slide, then you need to start to unpack further. The trust in different cultures will need to have those lenses in place. What does trust look like? So you start to define that as a journey.